Welcome to part 1 of our journey through the oldest surviving buildings in Gateshead, here on 55 degrees north. In this episode, we're stepping inside 3 of the town's remarkable survivors, a 13th century chapel, a 900-year-old parish church, and one of Gateshead's most iconic Victorian pubs. Each one has stood through centuries of change, and they're still here to tell their story. Let's hit the streets and uncover the stories hidden in plain sight. Our first stop takes us back over 750 years to a time of knights, pilgrims and plague. Nestled just off the modern high street, almost hidden in plain sight, is St Edmunds Chapel, the oldest surviving building in Gateshead. Built in the 13th century, this tiny chapel was once part of a medieval hospital complex run by a small religious order. Think of it not as a hospital like today, but more like a shelter, a place where the sick, the poor and the travelling could find food, care and spiritual guidance. The architecture is early Gothic, long and narrow. Look closely and you'll see its most distinctive feature, the west gable wall, decorated with 7 slim lancet windows, a classic design of the period. The doorway below is carved with elegant pointed arches. This little chapel may be small, but it's full of craftsmanship. Over the centuries, the chapel saw a lot, and somehow it survived it all. When King Henry VIII dissolved England's monasteries, many chapels like this were destroyed. But St Edmunds was abandoned, not demolished, and ironically, it may have saved it. Fast forward to the 1830s, the Industrial Revolution is booming and Gateshead is growing fast. Enter John Dobson, one of the North East's most famous architects. He restored the ruined chapel, giving it a new roof and a second life as a working Anglican church. Around 60 years later, the church was extended with a large Victorian wing, but the original chapel remained, tucked into the side like a sacred memory, and in 1980, after the local church was lost to fire, St Edmunds once again became Gateshead's main parish church. Today, it's not just a church, it's a space for reflection, art and community. The sanctuary art space runs exhibitions right here in the chapel nave, blending ancient faith with modern expression. So next time you're on Gateshead, take a detour down the side street behind Trinity Square, walk into St Edmunds, and you're not just stepping into a church, you're stepping back in time. High on the hill, above the River Tyne, stands a church with 900 years of history. St Mary's Church, often called the Mother Church of Gateshead. If walls could talk, these would tell stories of kings, rebels, fire and plague. The first church on this site dates back to before 1080. Back then, Gateshead was little more than a river crossing, and this hill was one of the first Christian sites in the region. The early wooden church was destroyed in one of England's bloodiest medieval uprisings. In 1080, Norman Bishop Walter of Durham took refuge here during a local rebellion. The mob stormed the church, set it ablaze and killed the bishop and his men inside. It was one of the first acts of resistance against Norman rule, and it happened right here. The present stone church rose in the 12th and 13th centuries, built stronger, taller and meant to last. Over time, it became the centre of life in Gateshead. Spiritually and practically, every baptism, marriage, funeral all took place here, and for hundreds of years it was the only place in town where you could legally get married. Architecturally, St Mary's is a rich blend of centuries, Norman foundations, 14th century Gothic arches and Victorian restorations. The stone tower was raised in the 1700s and still holds the original bells and clock. This church has known disaster too. In 1854, Gateshead and Newcastle were rocked by an explosion and fire down by the quayside. Flaming debris rained down and St Mary's caught fire. The roof collapsed, the windows shattered, it was nearly lost forever. Once again, it was John Dobson, yes, the same architect who saved St Edmunds, who stepped in. He rebuilt the chancel, restored the nave, and gave St Mary's the Gothic look it still wears today. Today, it's the St Mary's Heritage Centre, a space for concerts, exhibitions, and exploring Gateshead's deep history. You can walk in the same aisles trodden by medieval monks and Victorian brides, and then browse centuries of local archives and artwork. And now for something a little livelier. And no tour of Old Gateshead would be complete without a stop at the Central. This isn't just a pub, it's a survivor, a shapeshifter, a landmark, a place where working men toast at the end of a shift, where travellers rested their boots, and where today locals and visitors gather in a building that's been pouring pints since the 1850s. Built in 1854, at the height of Gateshead's industrial boom, the Central is a classic example of mid-Victorian pub architecture, but it has a twist, literally. It sits on a tight triangle of land, where two streets split, creating that unmistakable flatiron shape. Locals call it the Coffin, a nickname that stuck for over a century, and once you see it from above, you'll understand why. Look at the sandstone facade, curved arches on the ground floor, tall sash windows above, and stylish cornice running along the roofline. This place was designed to impress not just a boozer, but a Victorian statement piece. It was originally commissioned by Alderman Potts, a wine merchant, who knew the value of good frontage. The ground floor held the public bar, while the upstairs was likely used for music, billiards, or maybe the occasional smoky political meeting. By the 1890s, it was formerly known as the Central Hotel. In 1854, just months after it was built, Gateshead was rocked by the infamous Great Fire and Explosion. Warehouses near the riverside went up in flames. Explosions sent burning debris across the town. Buildings crumbled. Dozens died. Somehow, the Central survived. Singed maybe, shaken, but still standing. And the resilience became part of its character. For decades, the Central served dockers, railwaymen and office workers. In the 20th century, it became the watering hole for musicians, artists and students. But by the 1990s, like many old pubs, it began to fade. Shutters went up, the building fell into disrepair. For a while, it looked like the doors would never open again. But in 2009, something incredible happened. The pub was rescued, bought and lovely restored by a local brewery. They brought it back to life, kept the original charm, restored the Victorian features, and even added a stylish rooftop bar. Tucked behind the parapet, it reopened in 2010. Today, the Central isn't just a pub, it's a destination. Real ale lovers, architecture fans, tourists all come here, and every pint served under these arches carries a little bit of Gateshead history with it. Victorian defiance, 21st century revival, one wedge-shaped building, and over 160 years of stories. That's it for part one of our look at the oldest surviving buildings in Gateshead. We've seen sacred spaces, lost chapels, a pub with one unforgettable shape, and there's still more to come. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a comment below and give the video a massive thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and hit the bell notification so you don't miss the next part. A massive thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on 55 Degrees North.